Hey everybody. Today we will begin an interesting discussion on history. I am ready. Take a $100 bill, hand it to a street vendor. He uses it to pay his supplier. The supplier uses it to pay his landlord. The landlord uses it to pay a contractor. The contractor uses it to buy groceries. 5 transactions, 5 exchanges of value. 5 times that $100 bill changed hands. At the end of those 5 transactions. The $100 bill is still worth $100, not 97, not 94. 100, every person in that chain received the full value they were owed. Nothing was skimmed, nothing was extracted, nothing disappeared. Now run the same experiment with a digital payment. The vendor taps a card reader. 2.5% goes to the payment network before he receives anything. His supplier pays online. Another processing fee disappears. The landlord accepts a bank transfer. A transaction fee is deducted. The contractor pays with a credit card. Another interchange fee vanishes. The grocery store processes a digital payment. Another slice is taken, 5 transactions. 5 extractions. The same $100 in economic activity has generated fees, interchange charges, and processing costs that quietly transferred wealth at every single step, not to any of the 5 people conducting business, but to a small number of payment infrastructure companies sitting invisibly between every transaction. On Earth, this is not a rounding error. This is not a minor inconvenience. Globally, payment processing fees extract hundreds of billions of dollars from commerce every single year, from vendors, from consumers, from small businesses, from entire local economies quietly, automatically, invisibly, at a scale that makes it one of the largest wealth transfers in the history of commerce, and it is accelerating because the people who benefit from digital payments are spending enormous resources to eliminate the alternative, to make cash inconvenient, to make digital the default, to make the invisible toll booth unavoidable. They called it the cashless society. They said it was about convenience. It was never about convenience. Part 1: The invisible toll booth, the Visa and Mastercard duopoly. There are 2 companies that sit at the center of virtually every electronic payment made on Earth. Visa and Mastercard do not issue credit cards, they do not lend money, they do not hold deposits, they manufacture nothing, they employ relatively few people for the scale of economic activity they oversee. What they do is operate the rails, the infrastructure through which digital money moves between buyers and sellers across the global economy. And for operating those rails, they collect a toll on every single transaction that passes through them. The interchange fee, the charge extracted from merchants every time a customer pays by card, typically ranges between 1.5% and 3.5% of the transaction value, depending on the card type, the merchant category, and the specific network agreements in place. The exact percentages vary by country and context, but the direction is consistent. A percentage of every digital transaction flows to the payment network and its associated banks before the merchant receives anything. Consider what this means in practice for a small business. A local restaurant with annual revenue of $500,000, processing the majority of its payments digitally, pays somewhere between $7,500 and $17,500 per year in payment processing fees. That money does not go toward better ingredients, higher staff wages, or lower prices for customers. It goes to Visa, MasterCard, and the banks that issue the cards their customers carry. This is a tax. It is not called a tax. It appears nowhere on your receipt. It is collected not by a government but by a private duopoly that controls access to the infrastructure through which modern commerce must flow. Visa and MasterCard together process the vast majority of card transactions globally. Their combined market capitalization exceeds $1 trillion. Their profit margins are among the highest of any large company on Earth because their business model is extraordinarily simple. Build the rails once, charge for everything that moves through them forever. The genius of the model is its invisibility to consumers. The merchant bears the fee. The consumer sees nothing deducted from their account beyond the purchase price. The toll is paid, but it is paid behind the wall of the merchant's pricing, absorbed into the cost of goods, passed on through slightly higher prices, invisible in any individual transaction but enormous in aggregate. When cash was the dominant payment method, this toll did not exist. A cash transaction between a buyer and seller is complete at the moment of exchange. No infrastructure required, no percentage extracted, no invisible intermediary collecting rent on the relationship between buyer and seller. The push toward a cashless society is, among other things, a push toward a world in which every commercial transaction generates revenue for payment infrastructure companies, a world in which the freedom to transact without paying tribute to a private network is systematically eliminated. Between 2010 and 2023, the percentage of transactions conducted in cash declined dramatically in most developed economies. In Sweden, cash now accounts for less than 10% of retail transactions. In the United Kingdom, less than 15%. In the United States, the decline has been steady and significant. Each percentage point of that decline represents a transfer of transaction fees, of processing revenue, of interchange income from the merchants and communities conducting commerce to the payment networks that now sit between every buyer and every seller. The toll booth was built so gradually, so conveniently, that most people drove through it for years before anyone thought to ask who was collecting the toll and where the money was going. Part to the death of anonymity, data is the new currency. But the interchange fee is only the first layer of extraction. There is a second payment that every digital transaction requires. It does not appear on your statement. It is not denominated in dollars or euros or any currency you can count, but it is more valuable to certain parties than the transaction fee itself. It is your data. Every digital payment you make generates a data point: the merchant, the amount, the time, the location, the category of purchase, the frequency of similar purchases. The relationship between this transaction and the hundreds or thousands of others that preceded it in your financial history. Individually, each data point is trivial, aggregated across years of transactions, across every category of your spending, across the patterns that emerge from the full record of your financial life. The picture that emerges is extraordinarily detailed. It tells companies what you eat, where you travel, what medications you take, what your political donations reveal about your beliefs, what your late-night purchases suggest about your emotional state, what the trajectory of your spending reveals about your financial situation long before you might disclose it to anyone. This data is collected, it is stored, it is analyzed, it is sold, shared, and monetized in ways that the terms of service you agreed to permit, but that most people would find alarming if they understood them in concrete terms. When you pay cash for a purchase, no record is created. The transaction is anonymous. The merchant knows they received payment. Nobody else knows the transaction occurred. When you pay digitally, a permanent record is created and distributed to multiple parties: your bank, the payment network, the merchant's payment processor, and potentially data brokers who purchase transaction records. To build behavioral profiles, you paid twice, once with your money, once with your privacy. Financial surveillance is not a hypothetical concern. It is the operational model of the modern digital payments industry. The data generated by payment systems is used by financial institutions to assess creditworthiness, by marketers to target advertising, by employers and insurers in ways that vary by jurisdiction, and increasingly by governments seeking insight into the financial behavior of their populations. In 2021, the United States Treasury proposed requiring banks to report to the IRS any account with more than $600 in annual transactions. The proposal generated significant controversy and was ultimately scaled back, but it illustrated the direction of travel: digital financial records as an instrument of government surveillance of individual economic activity. In China, the integration of financial data with social credit systems has demonstrated one endpoint of this trajectory: a system in which your financial behavior is tracked, scored, and used to determine your access to services, travel, and economic opportunity. This is not cited to suggest that Western democracies will necessarily replicate the Chinese model. It is cited to demonstrate that the infrastructure for financial surveillance, once constructed, creates possibilities that did not previously exist, and those possibilities tend over time to be explored. The death of cash is the death of financial anonymity, and financial anonymity the ability to conduct transactions without generating a permanent record accessible to corporations and governments has been a feature of human commerce for thousands of years. It is being eliminated, quietly, marketed as convenience. Part 3: The CBD Endgame, Programmable Money. Everything discussed so far, the interchange toll, the data extraction, the financial surveillance, exists within the current system. It is the architecture of the present. What is being constructed for the future is something categorically different, something that makes the current system look, by comparison, almost benign. Central Bank Digital Currencies (CBDCs) are digital currencies issued directly by central banks. Unlike cryptocurrencies, which are decentralized and operate outside government control, CBDCs are the opposite: centralized, government issued, and designed to give monetary authorities an unprecedented degree of visibility and control over how money flows through an economy. As of recent reporting, over 100 countries are in various stages of researching, developing, or piloting CBDCs. The Bahamas, Nigeria, and Jamaica have launched retail CBDCs. China's digital yuan is in advanced pilot deployment across dozens of cities. The European Central Bank is in the investigation phase of a digital euro. The Federal Reserve is conducting research. The direction is clear. The stated rationale is financial inclusion, payment efficiency, and monetary policy effectiveness. These are real considerations. There are genuine arguments for CBDCs that do not require sinister intent. But the technical architecture of programmable money creates capabilities that go far beyond payment efficiency, and those capabilities deserve to be understood clearly. Programmable money is currency that carries conditions, rules embedded in the currency itself that govern how, where, when, and by whom it can be spent. In a CBD system with programmability, a government could issue stimulus payments that expire if not spent within 60 days, eliminating saving in favor of immediate consumption. It could restrict certain categories of spending, limiting how much can be spent on goods deemed unhealthy, or on purchases from foreign entities, or in locations outside a defined geographic area. It could tie access to digital currency to compliance with government requirements, tax filings, vaccination records, behavioral metrics. In any system the government chooses to link. It could, in extremis, turn off an individual's access to money entirely, not confiscate the money, not freeze an account in the traditional sense, which requires a legal process, simply disable the ability to transact, to buy food, to pay rent, to participate in the economy. This is not speculation about what CBDCs will definitely do. It is a description of what programmable money technically can do, based on the architecture being developed and the statements of central bank officials who have publicly discussed these capabilities. In 2021, a senior official at the Bank of England discussed the possibility of programming CBDCs to ensure they could only be spent on certain goods. In 2022, a senior official at the Bank for International Settlements, the Central Bank of Central Banks, stated explicitly that CBDCs would give authorities absolute control over the rules and regulations governing their use, absolute control over the rules governing how you use your money. Consider what this means for the relationship between citizen and state. Currently, a government that wishes to restrict an individual's economic activity must go through legal processes: freeze an account, obtain a court order, seize assets through established legal procedures that, however imperfect, provide some procedural protection. In a fully implemented CBD system with programmability, those procedural protections become optional features rather than structural requirements. The ability to restrict, condition, or eliminate access to money could be implemented technically at the infrastructure level without requiring the legal process that currently constrains such actions. The difference between money you own and money you are permitted to spend is not semantic. It is the difference between financial freedom and financial servitude, between a currency that serves the holder and a currency that serves the issuer. Cash cannot be programmed. A physical banknote carries no conditions. It cannot be given an expiration date. It cannot be restricted to certain purchases. It cannot be disabled remotely. It cannot report your transactions to a central authority. It is, in this sense, the most free form of money ever devised, perfectly anonymous, perfectly unrestricted, perfectly owned by whoever holds it. The elimination of cash and its replacement with programmable digital currency would represent the most significant transformation of the relationship between money and freedom in human history. Not because every government will immediately implement the most extreme version of programmable money's capabilities, but because the infrastructure once built makes those capabilities permanently available, and capabilities that exist tend, over time and under sufficient pressure, to be used. The climax, the trade we never agreed to. Trace the arc of the last 50 years. Cash was inconvenient, so cards were introduced. Cards were convenient, so digital payments expanded. Digital payments were seamless, so apps and tap to pay replaced wallets. The friction of physical currency was eliminated at every step, replaced by something smoother, faster, more integrated into the texture of daily life. At each step, the trade seemed obvious: convenience for friction, speed for the minor hassle of handling physical currency. Nobody forced the transition. It happened because the new system genuinely was more convenient for the consumer in the moment of each individual transaction. But the cumulative effect of those individually reasonable choices was the construction of an infrastructure that extracts a percentage of every commercial transaction on Earth, that records and monetizes the full behavioral profile of every person who participates in it, and that is now being upgraded into a system of programmable money that carries, in its technical architecture, the capability for a degree of financial control over individuals that no previous monetary system has ever possessed. We traded financial anonymity for the convenience of not carrying cash. We traded transaction privacy for the ability to pay with a tap. We traded freedom from surveillance for the rewards points. Our credit cards accumulate. None of these trades were presented to us as trades. They were presented as upgrades, as progress, as the natural and inevitable evolution of how modern people manage money. The question that this framing consistently avoided is the one that matters most. In a world where every transaction is recorded, where payment infrastructure is controlled by a small number of private duopolies, and central banks, where programmable money can carry conditions that govern what you are permitted to purchase, who controls that system, and in whose interest is it designed to operate? The answer is not the person tapping their phone on a card reader. It is not the small business owner paying 2.5% on every sale. It is not the consumer who loaded their data into a loyalty program for the promise of a free coffee. The architecture was designed by the institutions that benefit from it, and it has been deployed so gradually, so conveniently, so seamlessly integrated into ordinary life that the full scale of what was constructed only becomes visible when you step back and look at all of it together. A $100 bill passed through 5 hands retains its full value. Digital money passed through 5 hands generates fees, data, and surveillance at every step for parties who were never part of the transaction, who provided no value to either buyer or seller, who simply built the infrastructure and now collect rent on every human exchange that passes through it. Cash was not perfect, but it was free in a way that its replacement is not. The cashless society was sold as convenience. What was purchased, without most people realizing what they were agreeing to, was a system in which financial freedom is increasingly conditional on compliance. On behavior, on the continued permission of the institutions that control the infrastructure through which money must now flow. You were never asked whether this was the trade you wanted to make. Now you know the trade that was made on your behalf. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe to Economic Chronicles, the hidden architecture of money and power. We show you where to look.